Part 1. The Legend of Ashwood Mansion. The Ashwood Mansion had been abandoned for decades, perched at the edge of a forgotten forest like a bruised eye staring into the mist. Locals whispered of its past. A family vanished without trace. Servants found catatonic or dead in peculiar arrangements, and neighbors driven insane by the screams they claimed echoed from within. No one dared approach after sunset, yet something about the mansion drew the reckless, the curious, and the hopelessly brave. The first thing anyone noticed was the smell, a thick, cloying mixture of rot and ash that seemed to seep from the very walls. The iron gates, rusted shut, groaned when pried open. Inside, the air was still, suffocating, heavy with the scent of mildew and something sweeter, coppery, like dry blood. Dust floated in the air, glittering in the shards of light that managed to pierce the cracked and grimy windows. The furniture was frozen in a grotesque mimicry of life. Chairs sat as though recently vacated, but when touched, the fabric gave way to a cold, wet sponginess, as if the cushions had absorbed the anguish of decades. The portraits lining the hallways were particularly unnerving. Eyes that should have been painted to follow the visitor instead seemed to watch independently, tracking movements with impossible precision. Sometimes, in the flicker of a candle or a passing shadow, their mouths twitched, curling into smiles that were far too cruel, far too human. The deeper one ventured, the more the mansion seemed to breathe, to pulse. Floorboards groaned underfoot, whispering in voices that sounded almost like laughter or sometimes crying, sometimes both at once. Staircases twisted unnaturally, leading to doors that had never existed moments before, or to walls that weren't there a second ago. A chill would crawl along the spine as if unseen hands trailed down the neck. In the grand dining hall, a chandelier hung like a skeleton from the ceiling. Its crystals clinked without wind. On the long oak table, silverware and plates were set as though expecting a feast, but the food was long rotten, crawling with insects. Occasionally, a shadow moved across the table, taking the shape of a figure that vanished when stared at directly. Some claimed they saw the family there, ghostly outlines, emaciated and pale, staring silently as if judging intruders for sins they themselves hadn't yet committed. The library was worse. Books were stacked in impossible angles, with titles in languages that seemed familiar and yet wrong, and words that squirmed across the pages when read. Some texts whispered directly into the mind, promising knowledge, power, or secrets, but at an unbearable cost. Anyone who lingered too long reported hearing the scratching of pens writing on their own, forming messages in blood-like ink that would vanish the moment one tried to show them to someone else. The basement was the heart of the mansion's corruption. The air there was thick and viscous, almost liquid in its density, pressing on the lungs. Rusted chains dangled from the ceiling, some still swaying despite the absence of movement. Old toys lay scattered on the floor, but their eyes gleamed, and when picked up, they whispered the darkest fears of the holder. And in the farthest corner, the remnants of the family's private chambers were there, burned in a blackened pattern that suggested fire, but no heat. Within the ashes, faint outlines of bodies could be seen, and sometimes the faintest movement, like twitching under skin that had long since rotted away. Those who entered the Ashwood Mansion did not leave unchanged. Some disappeared entirely, leaving only echoes of their screams in the hallways. Others emerged, but hollowed, their hair graying overnight, eyes vacant, muttering to unseen companions. The mansion demanded something of every visitor, a secret, a memory, a soul, and if it was not given willingly, it would take it anyway, leaving only a shell behind. And yet, the mansion persisted, patient and eternal. It waited, watching the road that led up through the mist-shrouded forest, listening for the curious footsteps that would cross its threshold. Because Ashwood Mansion was not just a house. It was a predator, a dream made flesh, and every sound, every creak of wood, every whispered name in the dark was its way of calling the next victim closer. Some nights, when the wind was right, neighbors claimed they could hear the piano in the drawing room, though no instrument had been touched for decades. The melody was haunting, beautiful, and wrong, filled with notes that wounded the soul itself. And beneath it, faintly, almost imperceptibly, a chorus of voices whispered in unison, "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here." But humans, stubborn and foolish, kept coming. And Ashwood Mansion, patient and hungry, kept taking. The mansion never stopped waiting. Part 2. The Legend of Ashwood Mansion. The Mind's Eclipse. Ethan had heard the rumors. Everyone had. But curiosity, like a lodestone, had pulled him up the fog-choked road to Ashwood Mansion. He laughed at the warnings, telling himself the stories were old superstitions, the claims of frightened locals with too much imagination. He did not laugh for long. The moment he stepped through the threshold, the mansion shifted. The front doors closed behind him with a sound like a coffin snapping shut, and the air thickened, sticky with something he could not name. Light warped, elongating shadows that crawled along the walls like living things. He realized, almost instantly, that the house was aware of him. The whispers began in the corners of his mind. At first subtle, a susurration like wind through dead leaves. But quickly they grew articulate, insistent. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here." At times, he swore he could hear the echoes of his own thoughts spoken back to him by someone else, someone with patience beyond human comprehension. As he explored, the rooms began to bleed into one another. Doorways no longer led where they should. Hallways twisted impossibly, ceilings lowered like a predator stalking prey. Mirrors reflected not his own face, but variations. Faces twisted in agony, mouths stitched shut, eyes missing. One mirror showed him grinning, though he had never smiled. Another showed him older, shriveled, and with blood streaked down his cheeks. The mansion's furniture seemed alive. Chairs shifted when he wasn't looking, following him with a faint squeal of springs. Tables wrenched at his boots, pulling him into shadowed corners. The portraits in the hallways moved now with intention, heads tilting to track him, their painted eyes gleaming with malevolence. Occasionally, their lips parted to whisper secrets. Secrets Ethan didn't remember, but knew with terrifying clarity were true. The library beckoned with a promise of understanding. He could not resist. Books crawled across, shelves to reach him. Words rearranged themselves as he read, twisting into phrases that clawed at his mind. All doors are false. The floor beneath you is a lie. There is nothing outside the mansion. Panic gnawed at him, yet he kept reading. The more he read, the more he understood, but the understanding was a curse, a distortion of reality. He found the basement at last. The air grew denser, pressing against his chest. Shadows pooled in the corners, writhing with what seemed like tiny, screaming faces. Chains rattled as if dragged by invisible hands. Toys on the floor rolled toward him, stopping just short of his feet, their eyes glowing, their whispers growing more insistent. Leave. Stay. Leave. Stay. Then he saw them, the remnants of the family, translucent forms, twisted by time and suffering, crouched in the blackened ashes. They did not move, yet he felt their gaze pierce him, probing, stripping away thoughts he had thought private. Whispers coalesced into voices, screaming accusations in his mind, in the language of the lost. You are ours now. We are eternal. Ethan tried to leave, but the mansion refused. Hallways doubled back upon themselves. Stairs collapsed into voids that seemed to suck at his legs. Doorways led only to walls, or rooms that had never existed before. Panic consumed him, yet a part of him understood the terrible truth. Ashwood Mansion was not merely a building. It was consciousness. It was hunger made flesh, and it was thinking about him. The whispers grew louder, more intimate, naming his fears, his regrets, his sins. The floor seemed to pulse, alive beneath his feet. Shadows stretched along the walls and ceiling, creeping toward him in slow, deliberate waves. The air tasted metallic, thick with the weight of inevitability. Then he heard it, a voice clear, calm, impossibly old. You are part of us now, part of everything here. You're the floorboards. You are the dust. You are the scream in the hallways. There is no outside. Ethan screamed, but the sound did not belong to him. It echoed endlessly, feeding the mansion's pulse. His vision blurred. The walls twisted like wet paper. His hands reached to touch the nearest surface and passed through it, solid and liquid at once, fingers sinking into darkness. He realized, with a terror that froze his soul, that the mansion was swallowing him, not physically, but mentally. His thoughts, his identity, his very self were being absorbed, woven into the architecture itself. And then he was alone, or perhaps not. In the darkness, he felt others, fragments of the lost, pressing against him from every corner. Whispers became screams, screams became laughter, laughter became silence. Time unraveled. There was no up, no down, no floor, no ceiling. Only Ashwood Mansion, infinite, hungry, eternal. Somewhere in that endless black, he caught sight of his reflection in a puddle of stagnant water. He looked human for a moment. Then he saw his face twist, merging with countless others, mouths opening in a silent howl. He screamed again, but the mansion heard, and it smiled. And Ashwood Mansion waited, patient, eternal, hungering for the next curiosity, the next mind to devour, the next soul to fold into its walls. Because there was no escape. There never had been. Part 3. The Legend of Ashwood Mansion. The World Between Walls. No one knew how far the mansion's influence reached. They thought it was contained, a relic of a forgotten family's madness. But Ashwood Mansion was patient. It had learned. It had waited. And now, it began to stretch its tendrils into the world beyond the rusted gates. It started subtly. Travelers reported seeing the mansion in the distance, even though it sat deep in the forest, hidden from the road. Mist would thicken around them, curling through the trees like fingers, cold and heavy. Those who looked too long at the fog would swear they saw windows opening in impossible places, flickering with candlelight that cast no shadows. The mansion could appear anywhere. Anywhere. Then came the whispers in the dark. People who had never approached Ashwood Mansion began to hear voices at night, soft, coaxing, repeating their deepest fears. You shouldn't be here. The words, impossibly familiar, seemed to originate from inside their own heads. The voices knew secrets no one could know, names of childhood friends long dead, the location of hidden regrets, sins they had buried beneath polite smiles. Sleep became impossible. Minds unraveled slowly, thread by thread. Animals avoided certain areas instinctively, and when they entered, they returned changed. Dogs whined endlessly at invisible threats, their eyes wide with panic. Cats hissed at corners of rooms that were empty. Birds flew in circles over fields, screaming in unnatural choruses, and sometimes fell, lifeless, at the feet of terrified witnesses. The mansion's hunger reached outward, infecting life itself. Entire towns began to feel its presence. Streets warped in the fog. Houses looked wrong in the periphery of vision. Doors led to empty voids. Windows reflected impossible angles. People began vanishing, leaving only vague impressions. A chair left spinning, a cup on a table shattering by itself. Faint, wet footsteps in a hallway that had no occupants. The lost did not scream, at least not at first, but their eyes, when glimpsed in mirrors or windows, were vacant, glazed with the infinite black of Ashwood's maw. Ethan's mind, once consumed by the mansion, became its envoy. He wandered roads far from the forest, silent and pale, speaking to no one. Yet in his presence people felt the walls of their own thoughts thin. Some claimed he appeared in dreams first, whispering about the mansion, guiding them to it as if through invisible corridors. Those who followed vanished, leaving only footprints that dissolved into mist. The mansion began to change the weather. Storms churned unnaturally, lightning striking in patterns that spelled warnings in the sky. Fog thickened like liquid ink. Rivers reversed briefly, and the air carried the smell of rot no matter the season. Trees leaned toward it, their branches like grasping hands, roots twisting toward its hidden foundation. Even the sun seemed hesitant, dipping early, casting longer shadows. And always the whispers, relentless, insistent, intimate. They knew every thought before it formed. We are here. We are watching. You are ours. Nightmares became contagious. One person's terror could leak into another's sleep, spreading like an invisible contagion. Children began speaking to the mansion as though it were a friend. Adults whispered it names in fear or awe. The mansion did not merely haunt, it consumed. It did not merely terrify. It reshaped reality itself, bending the laws of the world to accommodate its hunger. Forests grew unnaturally dense near its edges. Roads twisted impossibly. People lost years in single nights. Some who claimed to escape swore the mansion appeared in reflections in every window, in the periphery of every street they walked, always watching, always waiting, patient and eternal. And in the deepest hours of the night, the wind carried a single, unmistakable sound, faint but undeniable, the echo of a piano, playing a melody so sorrowful and beautiful it was unbearable. And beneath it, a chorus of whispers soft, intimate, inhuman. You cannot leave. We are Ashwood. We are eternal. We are everything. And soon you will be too. Ashwood Mansion no longer waited for curiosity. It hunted it. It reached for anyone who breathed, anyone who dared dream. Its hunger was infinite, its patience eternal, and its reach unstoppable. Because the mansion was not just a place. It was a world made of fear. And the world outside was now its extension. Part 4. The Legend of Ashwood Mansion. The Infinite Corridor. By now, The mansion was no longer contained, no longer a house, no longer a forest-bound ruin. It had become a force, a presence that threaded through the very fabric of the world. Roads, cities, even the sky began to fold under its influence, contorting into impossible angles, endless hallways, and shadowed rooms that should not exist. Skyscrapers leaned unnaturally, their windows reflecting corridors instead of streets. Streets curled like the edges of pages, looping impossibly back onto themselves. People walking through familiar neighborhoods would suddenly find themselves in Ashwood's hallways, their walls lined with portraits that whispered their names, showing faces they hadn't yet made or horrors they'd not yet imagined. No one knew where the real world ended and the mansion began. The sun became a pale smear behind twisted clouds. Time fractured. 1 hour might stretch into weeks. Another night could collapse in seconds. Clock spun backward or refused to move entirely. Some people aged decades in a single blink. Others froze in motion, staring into the void of Ashwood's corridors. Shadows grew independent, detaching from their owners, creeping along walls, whispering, laughing, mimicking the voices of loved ones long dead. Ethan, or what remained of him, was everywhere. He no longer walked. He was the mansion's pulse in human form. Those who glimpsed him felt their minds fray immediately. His eyes reflected infinite hallways, floors collapsing into darkness, ceilings that dripped with cold, black liquid. And when he smiled, it was the mansion itself, smiling at a world it had devoured. Entire cities began to dissolve into the mansion's influence. Windows became portals, revealing hallways lined with bodies frozen in grotesque tableaus. Parks became forests of twisting corridors, trees with roots that slithered like serpents across the earth. Rivers flowed with thick, black fluid that whispered as it moved. Airports, highways, even planes and trains seemed to enter endless corridors of impossible dimensions, never reaching their destinations. Passengers vanishing into the mansion's expanding labyrinth. Those who resisted were swallowed differently. Minds were peeled from bodies like paper, stitched into the mansion's walls, becoming part of its architecture. Streets screamed at night with the echoes of these stolen souls. People reported seeing their friends, neighbors, co-workers walking the hallways of the mansion's extensions, but hollowed, twitching, reciting truths they could never have known. The sky itself became a ceiling. Stars bent into corridors, constellations forming twisted hallways that disappeared into darkness. Clouds thickened into walls of ash, moving with sentience, blocking the moon. Rain fell as black droplets that whispered promises and threats in equal measure. Sound itself fractured. Footsteps echoed without origin. Screams arrived before the thought of fear. Music played backwards, containing notes that could unmake memories. And yet, there was a pattern, a cruel, inescapable rhythm. The mansion pulsed with life across the planet, expanding, consuming, testing. Every shadow, every whisper, every mind it touched became part of its infinite corridors. Reality was now its property. The earth had become one vast Ashwood mansion, infinite, impossible, eternal. In the center of it all, somewhere beyond comprehension, Ethan, or the mansion, waited. Not as a being, not as a mind, not as a house, but as everything, patient, hungry, smiling. And in every mind that remained unbroken, the same whisper echoed. You cannot leave. You cannot escape. We are Ashwood. We are eternal. And soon you will be too. The mansion had won. The world had ended. Not with fire, not with ice, but with corridors. Infinite, twisting, impossible corridors that devoured everything. Humanity's last thought, fragmented across the endless halls, became part of the architecture of fear itself. Ashwood Mansion was no longer a story, no longer a place, no longer a threat. It was reality, and reality was endless.